All right, this is a webcast for Unit 2 SI number 7. This is a topic that is an in-class topic, so you did not do any pre-reading or note-taking on SI number 7. So let me, before we begin, just kind of show you, here's your Canvas United States History course page. If you go to the home page and scroll down, you're going to see the units listed here. Unit 2 link can be clicked, and then you'll be able to see some other materials. You got the unit materials there, the SIs, the schedule, the essay questions. If you ever needed another copy, you could always get them there. You can see a previous webcast um, that may not be appropriate for your class. It kind of depends on what section um, that is listening right now, but you could listen to that if you wanted to. And then here's SI 7, George Washington's farewell address. That's the current topic that's at hand here. And what I would suggest is that you click this, open the PowerPoint, print it out so that you have a copy of the slides. You're going to see them on the screen here, but it might be easier if you have them printed out. And then add information, insight, as the webcast is providing, that you can write on the paper. I would like to see SI um, number 7 with some insight and information written on it, just to prove that you've actually listened to this webcast. We're going to start with this comment, the greatest man alive. So when George the Third heard that George Washington was going to give up his military command after the colonial victory in the War for Independence, um, George the Third said if he does it, he would be the greatest man to ever live. And so that's a remarkable indication of George Washington's character, is that he did not aspire to power. He didn't want more power than what he already had. He did his duty, and when his duty was over, he resigned his commission of command of the Continental Army, and he went back home to Mount Vernon. Then duty called again when he was elected as President of the United States to 2 terms. This is not something that he was looking for. He did not seek out the office of the president, but he felt bound by duty when selected that he needed to serve his country once again. But following that second term, he retired from public life once again. There was nothing in the Constitution at that point that restricted a president to 2 terms. In fact, it was a precedent that George Washington created for all other presidents to follow, that once you've reached a second term, then you willingly give it up. This way, you're not creating a precedent of perpetual power being held in the hands of one president, term after term after term. So what can we say? He gave up power twice. Perhaps King George's claim is true. 2 years after his presidency was over, George Washington was riding around his plantation at Mount Vernon on horseback in extreme cold conditions, and caught a cold, developed into a sore throat, and this ultimately was the cause of his death. A common treatment back in his day was called bloodletting. So the theory was that if you um, open through incision the body and let body or blood drain out, or if you put leeches on the body and let it suck blood out, that you would be uh, draining the body of the impurities that make one sick. So I went through this medical procedure several times, and ultimately it cost him his life. He lost so much blood that he couldn't fight the illness that he most certainly would have survived from had they had not drained him of a good share of his blood supply. So with that, we have the loss of a great man and a important figure in the founding of our country. We want to take a look at some of the precedents of George Washington. When he was inaugurated, he added at the end of the oath of office, "So help me God." That was not something that was written in the Constitution. He added, and every president since him has stated, "So help me God." There was a big conversation about what do we call this individual that's heading the executive, and there were some fancy, long-winded terms, many of them sounding very monarchical, like someone would speak to a king. And ultimately, George Washington sounded off by saying, it's just going to be Mr. President. Something simple, but yet respectable. There again, every president has that title. He's very much a dignified man in terms of how he carried himself, his character, his integrity, the way he treated people. So that kind of established an image for what the presidency was going to look like and feel like when people got into that office in the future. As I said already, he created the precedent that there would not be a third term for a president. Now we know that does get broken later on in history. We'll cover that later. But for a long time, that was the precedent that two-term presidents followed. The president's cabinet is something that George Washington put together, was not mandated by the Constitution, but something he did because it was reasonable and logical that he'd have a series of advisors to help him run the executive branch. We have the Whiskey Rebellion showing that the president is the commander-in-chief and can use military force to enforce laws of Congress. And then the last thing is establishing a strong presence of neutrality in foreign policy. So this is something that George Washington does in relationship to the French Revolution and then the war between France and England. And it really becomes kind of the nation's natural policy is to always stay out of the entanglements of foreign affairs, to remain neutral. We do trade and interact, but we don't take a stand or a position in one's conflicts. Stay neutral. I'm going to give you these terms, or these, I'm sorry, these pieces of text from George Washington. The top one is pretty amazing. When George Washington was given command of the Continental Army in the beginning of the American Revolution, this is how he responded to their appointment of him being the general. A lot of humility in those statements, and then in the diary at the bottom, um, showcasing a sense of duty for him when he was voted into the presidency. And so you can see him um, bidding adieu to Mount Vernon. That was his most cherished place, and the job that most fulfilled him was running his plantation. But he gave it all up to serve the country once again as president. When he left office after his second term, he spent a lot of time sitting down, writing, consulting, particularly with Alexander Hamilton, which is a trusted partner in his past life with the Revolutionary years, and now in his cabinet, Alexander Hamilton being the Secretary of Treasury. So they had a very tight, close relationship, and Hamilton was very much had the ear of the president and offered him advice throughout Washington's presidency. But as we're coming to an end, Hamilton helped clarify the thinking ideas and then literally writing out in paper. Hamilton did a lot of the actual writing of the final draft of the farewell address of what George Washington's final words to the nation would be. So this is why we call it the farewell address. Yet another precedent, other presidents following him will also give their farewell address, their final words and advice to the United States. So you can see in the third bullet or a fourth bullet point, much of the advice is a lengthy paper, by the way, um, which you have a copy of, an excerpt copy of it on Canvas if you would like to read it further. But he's warning this young infant nation of ours to pursue unity and not sectionalism. Sectionalism is when we are divided by different sectional or regional interests. We saw the rise of political parties and political factions, and that's very sectional in orientation also. That divide, differences dividing the country, and he was very concerned about the growing divisions because of these opposing political factions, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, and what impact they might have on weakening the unity of the United States of America. He puts a strong emphasis on religion and morality and virtue. In order to have a healthy republic, we need to have all of these in the mix. Certainly, local piety in our local churches, in our own homes, but also in schools, and really kind of reaching for an overwhelming national morality found in the scriptures so that we could always keep our course straight, make wise decisions, and keep the republic healthy. He was very much concerned with the national debt, had a lot to say about indebtedness and how it was best as a nation to not be into debt. His argument is that being into debt puts you in danger because now you become subservient to some outside force, which could be another nation. And why would you want to put yourself in that position? So don't exceed the spending from the revenue that the nation would bring in from year to year. And the last one, steer clear of permanent alliances. Already made mention of this, of how it's not worth risking our peace and our prosperity by getting aligned with a country that might be at odds or at war with someone else. So these are various excerpts from the farewell address of George Washington. I'm just going to throw them up there. You can kind of get a sense. I'm bolding the red for at the top. We want as little political connection as possible with foreign nations. Of course, we can trade commercially. He's not advocating a ceasing of commercial trade relationships with the world, but to have as little political connection as possible. Um, he says our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. What he's talking about is we had the greatest home court advantage in the world. We're separated from the greatest powers in Europe by a vast Atlantic Ocean, and we have future western borders protected by a vast Pacific Ocean. We have no great hostile neighbors to our north or our south. We have a detached and distant situation that is almost perfect. Why would we want to risk peace and prosperity, by linking ourselves with other foreign nations? So don't interweave our destiny. Don't entangle our peace and our prosperity in the toils of Europe. And you can see here why he took a stance of neutrality during his administration. So, what is our policy according to President Washington, and his advice for future presidents that would follow him is to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, and particularly the world he's referring to is Europe. So we might know this term isolationism. Isolationism is a more modern term, which could be applied to the warnings and advice of George Washington. And there you have it. Don't jeopardize America's peace and prosperity. And for the most part, in the early part of a republic, after Washington, presidents follow this advice. All right, so there you have it. SI number 7 overview.